for food. You eat it, it tastes good, it feels good. Most of the things that tempt you might feel good. Or says that it was pleasing to the eye. Most of the things that tempt you look good to you. And just because it looks good doesn't mean that it is good. All you single people, remember that. Just because it looks good doesn't mean that it is good. Good for food, pleasing to the eye, and then it says desirable for gaining wisdom. Wisdom gives you some kind of control, some kind of security. A lot of times we get tempted by things that would give us some kind of control, some kind of security. We turn away from God. And that's what Eve did. It says she took some and ate it, and then she gave it to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. He didn't stop her. He didn't say anything. He just went along with this diabolical program. And then it says, then the eyes of both of them were open, and they realized they were naked. Now, I have an issue with this because in chapter 2, verse 25, it says the man and his wife were both naked and they felt no shame. So it wasn't physical nakedness. It was something completely different. It was an internal nakedness. As soon as they ate that fruit, they felt exposed. And that's what happens when you seek a life without God. They ate that fruit and they saw that their internal worth was nothing without God, that they were dependent on God for their esteem, for their worth. And so it says, they realized they were naked. And then it says they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings. And this is what happens to all of us. You realize you're not really worth something, and you start trying to cover it. No, we don't cover ourselves with fig leaves. But we cover ourselves with a job. We cover ourselves with designer clothes. We cover ourselves with food. We cover ourselves with sex. We try to cover that ache, that missing piece, that brokenness that we have without God. The thing is, that covering is never enough. It's never adequate. Notice it says they sewed fig leaves together. And commentators talk about this. If you know anything about fig leaves are itchy. They chose the worst kind of covering. And so they covered themselves, but they're itching. They have this longing. They're getting worn away by what they really need. And a lot of times we try to cover ourselves with the money. We try to cover ourselves with relationships. We try to cover ourselves, but it's never enough. And it only makes us long for more. It's true. St. Augustine said, our hearts are restless until they find rest in you. And especially as a follower of Christ, if you're a follower of Christ and you try to cover up your need for God with something else, it hurts and itches even more because you know better. And all of us, every day, every time you wake up, you're on a quest to find your heart's true home, and it's only in God. And so they have these coverings. And it says that they heard God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid from God. They hid from God because they're ashamed. They feel guilty. A lot of times we hide from God. We hide from each other because of shame. We don't share everything in our lives. We don't confess what's really going on with us because of shame. See, shame is based on who you are. You may be ashamed that you're short. Shame, I used to always be ashamed. Man, you know what? I'm shorter than the average black man. And I used to just be upset by that. I go to family gatherings and everybody's taller than me. I would be ashamed. I get out on the basketball court and it's like, oh man, ashamed. Used to be ashamed. I couldn't play sports well. I go into another setting where people are richer or of a higher class, a different class than the way I grew up, and I'm ashamed of where I come from. I slip up and get into some ebonics, and I'm ashamed of the way I talk. There's all these things that can cause us to be ashamed and cause us to hide and cause us to not be our true selves. God doesn't want you to hide. Notice he's walking towards them. They're ashamed and they feel guilty. Guilt is based on what you've done. You may feel guilty for a lot of different things. Guilty about something that you've looked at that you know you shouldn't have looked at. Guilty about a thought that came into your head, a judgmental thought about another person. Guilty about a decision that you made that you know it hasn't turned out to be the right decision. God doesn't want you to live in guilt. He came to crush that. I want you to turn to your neighbor and tell him he came to crush